All right, hello. It is Thursday, August 31st, 2017 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Marketing Live. I am your host, Amy Jorgensen. On today's live broadcast, we'll be talking with Dr. James Vineburgh about identifying relevant audiences. Various higher education marketing goals pertain to specific audiences, and initiatives have traditionally been met with challenges in terms of the availability of technologies and data sources necessary to connect with the right people and inform important decisions associated with strategic planning. Today, we will speak with Dr. James Vineburgh, a higher education marketer with extensive experience in market research, predictive analytics, and digital marketing. We'll discuss new data sources for research purposes, how to collect data from and enhance engagement studies with your target audiences using new technologies, and also how to gain a better understanding of how institution brands are perceived in real time. Marketing Live is part of a Higher Ed Live network. Our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Be a part of our live broadcast by sharing your knowledge. Participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using Higher Ed Live, hashtag Higher Ed Live. All of our episodes are free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. Have you ever wondered what prospective teens are thinking when they receive and read or ignore your institution's recruitment marketing? The third study in the myth-busting series, in partnership with NRCCUA, is the first to focus on the complete enrollment marketing mix. The research will uncover the best marketing channels and communication preferences that have the biggest influence on prospective teens' perception of your institution. Sign up now and receive early access to the research results and white paper. So I'd like to shout out to Dr. James Vineburgh, co-founder of Schmooze. Welcome, James.
Thank you.
We are so excited to have you on the episode today.
It's an honor and a pleasure.
And so anyone, again, please use hashtag Higher Ed Live if you have any questions for James, and I'll do my best to send them along to him. So let's start off with a couple of questions of my own. So where do we start with some of this personalization?
Some of this personalization.
And identifying the target areas.
Well, I think that higher education has been undergoing some just incredible dynamic shifts in terms of demographics, in terms of communication channels that prospective students are using, the ways that they're learning about schools via websites and social media. It's the landscape changes very quickly. One of the things that I've been really focused on recently, and this kind of came through a partnership that I currently have with an employer that I used to be with, is the ability to find non-traditional students who are actively searching for higher education options. When you think about the traditional undergraduate side of the house, there is a machine in place by which schools can connect with prospective students. The testing services, ACT and College Board, NRCCUA, but the population shift, even at traditional undergrad institutions, non-traditional students, which are defined in many ways, oftentimes by age of, maybe being 25 or over, having jobs, families, there's a variety of different criteria, but those students comprise about almost half of undergraduate enrollment now. And until fairly recently, there has not been a really good way to find prospective students who meet that non-traditional criteria. And so one of the exciting opportunities that I've had, which we're actually working on a project with M. Stoner and a school where we're utilizing this audience and some new technologies to reach them. We've had some really exciting results about helping institutions that are trying to cater more and serve those audiences. We've been able to kind of find people who are actively searching higher ed options and, survey them, market to them. So it's kind of a new opportunity that schools have, because if you think about how schools would have tried to have found, non-traditional prospective students, you might go to a generic list provider, let's say, and, you might be able to search for certain types of demographic characteristics, ages, where they live, their employment status, et cetera. But, you'd have no idea whether those people were actually interested in higher education. And if so, what programs are they interested in? When are they looking to start? Do they prefer online or campus-based experiences? And so we now luckily have kind of a new data source that we've been able to tap into, whereby we can help schools kind of build that, programs for those audiences. So that's been really exciting.
So tell me about that new data source.
So there is, again, through a partnership that I have, it's a company that has focused traditionally on lead generation for higher education for many years. And basically, again, they have, literally millions of prospective students who fit the adult, non-traditional criteria across hundreds and hundreds of websites that are all designed for, the college search and selection process. And so over the last couple of years, we've done a lot of surveying of this audience. And that's given us some insights that have been used in kind of industry-facing, research. Part of it was for the E-Expectation series that, is put out by Ruffalo and Levitz and NRCCUA. And I got to contribute kind of the non-traditional component to that last year, which was really nice. And so basically, these are students who are using online technologies to look for, again, college options. And what's really great about it is we get so much information from them about, again, when they want to start, what programs they're interested in, their delivery preference in terms of online. And so it can really help schools, that have kind of like, degree completion programs, adult focused programs. And it's really, I think, providing an opportunity to better serve a rapidly growing audience, that up until, fairly recently, I think there just wasn't a great way to reach them. And again, that sort of dovetails nicely into the technology end of the equation too, is that, all of the research in higher education marketing, as far as how prospective students are learning about colleges, websites are far and away the number one, kind of information source, and usually kind of the first way that a prospective student will start learning about a college. And so the website experience is, it can't be overstated how important it is to have, a good web experience. And so coupled with that ability to reach these new audiences, we've started to put a lot of focus into how can we leverage new technologies that actually make websites better at inquiry capture or lead capture, depending on the terminology that people like to use. I know that a lot of schools don't like to think of prospective students as leads, and I understand that. But so for example, one of the technologies that we're actually using for the survey research, we're also using as those kind of live chat widgets that a lot of companies have, where like when you go on their website, something kind of pops up from the footer. Well, we've developed something similar, except it's not a live person. It's actually a predefined kind of conversation think of it as kind of a request for information form that can be really nicely branded, incorporate, the school's logos, color schemes. And so what happens is we have some schools that we're working with where, when you think about the key calls to action on a college website, usually it's, request information, schedule a visit, and apply now, right? The issue is that a lot of colleges, I think, don't have those calls to action, maybe as prominently displayed as they could be.
So true.
and even the ones that do, again, they require the prospective student to actually find those pages and forms before they can take meaningful, admissions related action. So what we've developed is a way to kind of merge that data collection, technology in a way that lives across an institution's entire website, or on whatever pages they want to. So we have some schools, for example, that have this kind of widget that appears on the home page, the program pages, the admissions and financial aid pages, and we've had just absolutely incredible results in terms of generating not only a vast number of inquiries, but really highly qualified inquiries, because these are people who are already visiting the school's websites, right? So they're interested, and we've had a lot of within a couple of weeks of implementation, we've had really powerful enrollment, impact, as well as just kind of helping schools fill the top of the funnel more. But also, we've already had a lot of really exciting downstream conversions in terms of applications and enrollments. And the idea here is that the same software, again, can be used to conduct a survey. It can be, really all it's doing is providing an opportunity to collect data and to provide data. So, when you think about a lot of live chats, for example, they require admissions counselors to actually, man them in real time. And then they also require a certain degree of training in that you want to steer the prospective students towards the information and the actions that they need. And so the nice thing about sort of predefining a conversation and workflow is that you take away that kind of possibility for negative improvisation, or what you could argue is maybe not the most effective use of time. So it's kind of merging. Really, it stemmed from really a market research mentality. So, for example, the school that we're working with M. Stoner, we're using the exact same technology to help them generate inquiries, but then we're also using the same software to actually conduct market research of, their internal community, current students, and other kind of stakeholders. So, the idea here, is kind of getting away from what I would consider kind of a siloed mentality in terms of functional departments, in terms of products and services. So thinking about, how can we infuse different philosophies and even components of what might be considered, different services or different departments, right? So, can we put something on a website which we know is so important to convey relevant information to prospective students? Can we collect information that we know is going to be really useful for financial aid and admissions, within the same short conversation, and get people engaged, right? So what we're kind of, what I've been thinking a lot about is think about different areas like market research and digital marketing and fuse them, right? So create opportunities to use kind of some of the strengths from different, functional areas, different types of products, and put them together and kind of break down what, maybe some people fall into kind of silo thinking, and that, oh, this isn't really our department, or, this doesn't really, this makes more sense for marketing to deal with, their admissions. And, how can we start to change that thinking and help people start to think in a more holistic and integrated fashion?
So you're making a more cohesive experience for the prospective student when they're coming in, trying to find the information, trying to bring stuff together. You're able to have much better market research in regards to what they're interested in. And what I'm curious about is it almost sounds like this is a chatbot. Is that kind of like a chatbot that kind of directs things? Is that kind of the right?
It does have a lot of that kind of back end. But again, the difference is that it does not. Some chatbots use artificial intelligence and kind of improvise. These are predefined conversations that they kind of look and feel like a text message thread, but they're set up kind of like a survey or a form whereby you're kind of only allowed to go in certain directions, right? So we've all heard those horror stories about like Microsoft's chatbot that went off on like a racist tirade because it learned from unfortunately negative influences online, and so we wanted to steer really clear of any type of possibility of that. So the other thing is that this has all been informed by working with really smart innovative admissions counselors, marketing, chief marketing officers, people in financial aid. Every product that I'm going to kind of talk about today, these were all born by real, kind of in the weeds experiences, right? So I think that sometimes you get products that are kind of solutions looking for problems. We've gone really the other way in that we've taken years of really, consulting on both sides of the table, kind of working with people in the private sector that are more on the kind of the vendor side, but also working with people who are in the trenches every day at schools, figuring out, what are the problems and what are the challenges that you're confronting every day, and how can we put systems in place that don't automate things in a way that take the necessary personal experience out of the mix, but how can we make things more efficient and ultimately convey the picture of the school that you want and that your prospective students need. And all of this also is largely, from a philosophical perspective, designed to help schools do things in more efficient and affordable ways. So, for example, the software that I was just telling you about that is used for kind of inquiry generation as well as research, for a price point that's just astronomically lower than what a school would pay a vendor for to come in and kind of conduct market research for them. Schools now have the opportunity to use predefined templates that they can then modify themselves, or get some help with, and now conduct research in a much more recurring and efficient way. So that instead of, one of the things I think that's been a real problem in higher education marketing is that to truly inform good marketing and recruitment strategy, a lot of the research and sort of data that's been necessary to craft those strategies has been exorbitantly expensive and also very bound in time. So, for example, for a school to pay, $80,000 or $100,000 to conduct market research, it's for the ones that can even afford to do that, they're not going to be able to do it again for a long time. And so therefore, inherently, that means that after a couple of years, they're going to be making important marketing decisions with information that's outdated. And given how fast the landscape is changing right now in terms of technologies and demographics, that's a real problem. And so, where we're coming at things is how can we empower schools to have the tools that they need, on a daily basis, so that they can collect information in real time and all the time in a way that's really going to kind of help them stay on top of the changing seas. And so that's been a big priority for us. So, some of the other, kind of products that we've developed, for example, are like predictive analytics software that is, again, available at a fraction of the price of what a lot of, other vendors in the space might be providing. And I think, the way that I kind of, the analogy I use is like, remember how web developers in like the late 90s and early 2000s, used to make, crazy money.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
they still do sometimes.
Sometimes they do. Right. But it's like, as the technologies have changed and as more people have learned how to use, different technologies and platforms, now, whereas somebody 10 years ago might have made $100,000 for a web design project, now there are people who can offer that out of their basement who are in high school for like a fraction. Right. And so that's kind of how we're looking at some of these other services is, instead of, thinking in terms of like, this is the way that things have always been done, and here's, what is required to be able to achieve this.
Hello, James. All right, I think James may have gotten cut off real quick, but we have a lot of good information coming. We're going to try and get him back on. Hopefully he can log back on, and then we'll keep going. But this is an incredibly interesting topic, because I think when he was first talking, I was thinking, oh, this just sounds like you need just really good overhaul of your website. but, and, making sure that it's really got positive user interaction, and it's really emphasized towards the user experience. But I think that's what's so special about what James is talking about is it's not just about, making sure the website's easy to navigate. It's being able to have all that market research so that way you're able to really tailor the content towards your audiences and also build the content better for your audiences. Because of course we can look at Google Analytics and say, okay, well, there's more people that are going to this page after this page, or here's the direction they're going in. But I think what's so fascinating is, James, I was just kind of giving a little bit of a anecdote regarding what we were talking about. So when I first heard you talking, I was thinking, oh, this is just like, it sounds like just like websites need a huge overhaul when it comes to user interface and user interaction. But what's really special, and that still might be the case, but what's really special about what you're talking about is the market research, and that you're able to really build a case of not just here's the pages they go to afterwards, but you're able to use that more as lead generation of once they get here, they're now, you know exactly what they're thinking, you know exactly what they're looking for. You have more information in regards to, really making sure you're tailoring content for those audiences. Because like you said, one of the biggest growing markets is an untraditional student, and that's incredibly valuable. And I don't think that many universities are tailoring content towards those audiences. And with the way you could build out your tool, like you said, you could have surveys. So you can say, here's the percentage of people that are coming to our website that are untraditional versus traditional, versus, maybe we have some military folks that are joining us. Maybe we have some folks that are, stay-at-home parents, and so being able to use that information to be very specific. Whereas on if you just had Google Analytics, you're making a lot of guesses in regards to those specific audiences and who's using your website. So this sounds incredibly valuable.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And again, thinking about, when you think about, let's say, a request for information form, right? It's not a terribly exciting idea, right? Very necessary, but you're collecting name and email address and maybe area of study interest, some different things. But what if so for example, some of the things we're starting to do is we know, for example, what activities and attributes are highly predictive of enrollment in many cases, right? So for example, people who actually visit campus, go on a campus tour, by and large are much more likely to enroll. Students who, it's kind of an obvious one, but students who rate the institution as their first choice are much more likely to enroll, right? So what some of the things we started to do, for example, are while we're collecting that more mundane information, like, what's your name, what's your email address, when do you want to start, what program are you interested in, sneaking in a couple things like, hey, where does ABC College currently rank for you, right? Or have you visited campus? If not, would you be interested? Little questions like that don't take a heck of a lot of time and don't seem like they're really off topic. Those are incredibly powerful. And when you have the answers to maybe one or two questions like that, as part of like your request for information form, for example, now you're armed with a whole nother kind of set of information that can be really useful and help you prioritize your prospects, help you, gain a little bit more information. So for example, knowing that an institution that somebody's requesting information about might be their second choice, that provides an incredible opportunity for follow-up, and you don't necessarily have to address that, but trying to find out a little bit more information, is another school offering a much better financial aid or scholarship package? Is there, whatever the information might be, but a couple of interesting questions here and there can really help frame the recruitment effort for that particular prospective student. And then, of course, in the aggregate, as you're collecting information over time, as you mentioned, knowing sort of the percentage of non-traditional students versus traditionals who are engaging with you in a conversation, right? And knowing, the time of day they're coming, what pages they're hitting. And like you said, Google Analytics certainly offers some incredibly powerful information there as well. But one of the limitations of Google Analytics, of course, is the lack of ability to identify a specific person,
Mhm.
right? And I think that that's, as great of a tool as it is in looking at information sort of in the aggregate, and certainly having great data to inform a lot of your website design and functionality and that kind of stuff. The one missing piece that I think frustrates a lot of people is like, I want to know what Joe Smith did, you
Yeah,
know?
definitely.
So this is kind of a way to, dial into that a little bit more.
Because I mean, otherwise you'd literally have to have a page for every single person. I mean, are you male, female? Are you, 5'10", 5'9", it's like all the different variables. I don't know why you would include height, but all different potential variables that you would want to include in order to do tailored marketing. And if I'm on a website and you ask me, just generally on a page of where does a school rank in my top choices, I don't know if I would answer that on a website page. You know what I mean? Like, but on a bot, it seems much more, or like the tool that you're talking about, it seems much more organic and authentic, and doesn't feel quite as awkward, because it's like if I put down that this is my third choice, what web page is it going to send me to next? Whereas this is more like, oh, this is kind of an anecdotal question. We're just kind of curious.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a really good idea.
Yeah, it's been very useful with a couple of schools where we've tried that. The other thing that's been really useful is, in addition to having, kind of like the website widget and, using the tool for more traditional types of market research where you're, inviting people via email or text message or whatever it is. We've started to think about, one of the problems with collecting data from anybody these days is that we are a society that is surveyed to death, right? I mean, you can't get off a plane or out of a grocery store without getting, an email within 30 seconds, right? With, how was your experience, whatever. And from a business perspective, ultimately that helps out everybody, right? It helps out the schools, it helps out the students, the customers, right? But it's really a question of like, do I want to spend 15 minutes filling out, radio buttons and check boxes and really, frankly, communicating in a very unnatural way, versus something that is much more aligned with the current preferences towards, text messaging and just kind of like a live chat kind of feel.
Well, and I like that you mentioned text messaging, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I have a 17-year-old younger brother who is hilarious and adorable, and he will not call you on the phone. He just won't. He wants to text and even Snapchat. Like those are the tools in which, the young, and I know we're talking about untraditional students a lot, but I mean the younger folks, they don't want to be talking on the phone. They don't want to have to leave a voicemail. That's like the worst thing ever, is like, I have to check my voicemail. So being able to put it in a format in which those folks are more comfortable with, and I think that's absolutely brilliant.
It's fun, so for this app that we're talking about, which is Schmooze, the whole experience kind of, again, looks and feels like a text message. But what's been really cool, so we're working with one school where we are sending text message we're sending via text message an invitation to participate in short surveys for everyone who's gone on campus tours, attended open houses. We even surveyed admitted students about their financial aid award experience. And what we found is, whenever we had cell phone numbers for those prospective students, we invited people, we can send people invitations to participate in these surveys via email and or text, or, and social media, some different ways. But the participation via text message invitation is like, it blew everything else away in terms of response rates. And, what's really interesting there is research on text messaging in general suggests that like 90% of people open and read a text message within 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just like, I mean, that's when you compare that to email open and read rates, and a lot of other forms of communication, it's an incredibly powerful tool. And what's interesting, the research that we did of non-traditional students in the e-expectation series last year, where that's all about kind of getting a better understanding for how different types of students are learning about colleges, interacting with them. One of the findings that really stuck out for me there was that something like more than 75% of the non-traditional students indicated that they would be willing to receive text messages from schools. Mm-hmm. However, less than 30% of them ever had. Mm-hmm. So, it's an enormous kind of missed opportunity, frankly, for schools that aren't leveraging text message communications. And again, this all fits into how can we how can we combine channel preferences with what might be thought of as more traditional market research, right? Which for many people is like a mailed letter where
Yeah.
people were right. And so what we're thinking about, and again, like in this project that M Stoner and I are working on with the school right now, we're kind of bringing all of this stuff together, marrying channel preference with necessary data collection and inquiry generation. And it's been an incredible experience with frankly a really innovative, forward thinking client that really understands that to move the needle these days, you have to kind of change things up a little bit. And
So do you
go
mind
ahead.
if I ask with, so you talked a little bit about this before, and I'd love to dive into some really concrete examples. So
Yep.
what if we are to try, and what do you think are some really valuable information that we could gain from market research? Like, so talking about different segmentations and talking about what are some things that we all can use in regards to, like, okay, getting an age demographic, is that a variable that is significant or not? Or getting a, where they're located in proximity to the school. So could you provide a little bit of background on some different variables that you think are very valuable in order to build a case for the predictive analytics you're talking about?
Sure. So and you just kind of hit on them. So thinking about a mixed methodology in terms of how you're collecting and analyzing data about people. So survey, clearly, and focus groups, those are really powerful ways to collect data from people, right? However, oftentimes real behavior is quite a bit different from what people say.
I know I should be working out, but that Snickers bar looks good.
Totally, right. And so you have, so surveys and focus groups can be really great for identifying attitudes. Hang on, let me quiet my phone down here. They're great at identifying attitudes, learning about how people are learning about your institution and how they perceive of it and things like that. But when you actually go into a school's historical admissions data, right, where you really look at everybody who's ever come in, as an inquiry, you look at the rates at which they've applied and or enrolled, and then you can see everything from their where they live, which from there you can glean proximity from the institution, which we know is typically a very important variable in the selection process. Things like extracurricular activities, programs of interest.
If they've done them now, or if they're going to do them at your institution.
Either or.
Okay.
In addition to things like religious affiliation, how many times the admissions team or financial aid team reached out and how much response there was. Schools collect varying amounts of information, and some do it much more robustly and or effectively than others. But what we find is, from a statistical standpoint, the predictive analytics is great at identifying a lot of non-attitudinal attributes of prospective students. So again, their test scores, their GPA, where they live, whether they're interested in athletics or arts or different kinds of things like that. And then the combination. So what we might find, for example, is proximity to school might be one of the most predictive variables in the enrollment decision, right? However, while that data is incredibly valuable and can really help a school target the right prospects, and use their resources a lot more efficiently, the combination of analyzing behavioral data as well as continuously collecting attitudinal data, provide a lot of that sort of comprehensive combined insight. And so, for example, thinking about, that's why knowing that proximity to the institution is typically very predictive of enrollment. that's why it's like it's so important to include a field for your zip code or your city or whatever on a form, right? Because once you have that, right, now you're already sort of going down that path of being able to predict how likely that prospective student is to enroll, right? Um, and so again, what might seem like a really just kind of mundane field on a form, if looked at in the right way, can be a very powerful data point that can help an admissions team, kind of speak to that person the right way or prioritize them.
So one of the variables you've talked about in the past is, understanding the attitudes of how the brand is perceived in real time. So
yes,
wouldn't anybody who goes to a admissions website say like this is the best school ever, or do you find that they're being authentic? Because if I give you my name and my information, and then I tell you I think the school's like B school, then isn't that going to affect my ability to be able to get into the school? That's what I would think. So how are you able to make sure that it's authentic? And you know what I mean? Like, I hope that's okay.
Yeah. Sure. So that that what you're talking about is certainly one way of approaching that. The real time sort of perceptual analysis actually. So we have an additional piece of software that is a social media analytics and monitoring software.
Ooh.
And so what we so the real time kind of understanding of the perception is gleaned more through social media data. And that is where we can, for example, search social media for an institution's name, their main Twitter handles, their hashtags they might be using for specific campaigns. And by analyzing the sentiment of those conversations on social media, as well as by, doing a little bit of additional qualitative analysis about the topics and themes that they're thinking about and talking about on social media, that is a way to kind of take real-time information and look at it again as another data source. So even though this information again is unstructured and it's authentic, it's real time, it can be used as kind of an ancillary way to, again, kind of gain an understanding for how you're being perceived as an institution. So thinking about surveys and focus groups, for example, one of their biggest limitations is that they're bound in time. Right. So if you're running a survey over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, or focus groups, you're getting information, perceptual information in that limited window. Whereas with social media data, you can collect information all the time. Now, there are sort of methodological pros and cons to both types of data. But again, thinking about things in a more holistic and comprehensive way, the key is understanding that, like, okay, this set of tools is really good for this purpose and gives me, here are the pros and cons of it. And now here's another tool whereby we can get some additional information. Here are the pros and cons of that. Right. And so thinking about everything from predictive analytics to kind of real-time social media conversation, ways to engage, your website visitors more effectively. The key is in not looking at any of this as kind of like a one stop, is like a one-shot deal, or like, a magic bullet that's going to solve all these problems. The key again is in looking at how can all of these various data sources ultimately be analyzed and framed in a singular way, where the goal is to, do X. Is it to help people learn more about our brand? Is it to enroll more students? Is it to elevate our academic profile? Whatever those goals are, they're going to make you use the tools differently, right? So, for example, I think a great example is with the predictive modeling software, right? The way that a school that has an overarching enrollment decline problem is going to use it is going to be very different. So, for example, let's say that we run 1,000 prospective students through the model, and the sort of deliverable is that every prospective student has a score from 0 to 100% in terms of how likely they are to enroll at the institution. Now, for a school with a huge enrollment decline, a sensible solution for them might be to focus on the students who have the highest percentage likelihoods.
Yeah.
across the board. Now, let's take a school where they don't, where their goal isn't necessarily to, just enroll a bunch more students, but they actually want to grow specific programs, or they want to elevate their academic profile. So that what that's going to require is segmenting those prospective students into their programs of interest or their academic achievement levels, and targeting people within those subgroups that have the highest likelihood of enrolling, right? So maybe a school's trying to build their zoology program, and they had 100 students in their database who indicated interest in zoology. The people with the highest likelihood of enrollment there might only be 70%, but
Right.
but it's better to target the people who are 70% versus 2% likely to enroll, right? So it's like, so the key is in recognizing that any of these methods, any of these tools, whether it's software, whether it's consulting, none of it means anything if it's not appropriately tailored towards meeting goals,
Yeah.
right? And working within the context of how schools operate, right? So like, introducing a new technology or trying to implement a new policy or practice in a way that really conflicts with how work gets done there and how people are comfortable working is a huge problem, right? And so, for example, I've seen a lot of times where, let's say, a vendor has a really good CRM product, and they might, a school might implement that CRM, but if they don't have the proper training and support, it's going to end up being more of a hindrance than a help.
Exactly.
Right. And people just get frustrated. So it's like, that's a whole other side of why, any of these tools, they all have to be approached in a collaborative way that are implemented in comfortable and practical ways. Right. And so,
and
for
I was
example, go
sorry.
ahead. Yeah, please interrupt me, because I'll keep babbling.
I was so excited when you were talking. I didn't want to interrupt you because you had so many good thoughts, but I was so excited when you started talking about the information, how you can gain a reputation perception based on what they're doing on social media. And I'm curious how that works with big schools that have like SEC schools when it comes to football season, because years ago, I remember looking at two different institutions that were in one state, and it was competitively harder to get into one school than another. But then that other school started doing really, really, really well in football, and now it's harder to get into the school that used to be easier to get into. And so it's really true that academics are totally impacted by sports, because more students want to go to that school. They want to have pride for that school. It's in the news more often. And so I'm curious if there's a big game that's happening. I'm going to the University of Florida right now. I just started. We were talking about that. We're playing against Michigan this weekend. So if we lose to Michigan, does that mean that fewer people are going to apply to the University of Florida? I bet you there's some weird correlation between that. And because they're going to be talking about it on Twitter and they're going to be talking about social. I'm curious, like, if you could actually associate it with that and then use that as justification of, we need to spend more money on our, whatever team.
So that's a really, so that's kind of funny. So a couple years ago, I wrote a white paper that was called March Madness.
Yes.
And how to get, like, I can't remember the exact title. It was basically like how to obtain more social media ROI. And so what we did was we took a lot of the schools that were in the tournament, and we looked at how people were talking about them on social media. and beyond that, what we also were isolating were conversations that were focused on the college search and selection process. And what we found, and what we still find today, so for example, we find all the time that there are prospective students who are in the midst of the college search and selection process who will go on Facebook and Twitter and on these other channels, and they will provide a lot of information about where their heads are at. Right. Yeah. And so, I see posts all the time that are like, just got my 4th acceptance from ABC College. Now I just need to see if XYZ gives me, more financial aid, or, and so, like, there is so much information out there being provided by people who, aren't kind of willingly providing information, so you have to be careful. There are definitely kind of ethical concerns and issues that have to be handled delicately about how this information is used. But, for example, I see all the time, social media conversation that can really tell a school where there are opportunities or deficits or things that they're not being perceived on well, right? So it's like, I mean, I remember somebody who had, gotten into Columbia University a couple years ago and was like $63,000 a year for tuition, like, stick a knife in me, and so it's like, you get things that are, again, sort of put out there casually and conversationally that actually provide really good information about, the drivers of the college selection process, right? So it's like, and we know what those are through conducting a lot of research over time. It's the, the strength of the program of interest. It's the, cost, right? The financial aid and scholarship opportunities. It's, the perceived rank and reputation of the school, the perceived quality of the faculty. So we know what drives the selection process, and that's why if you look for the right information and can find it, whether it's on social media or through surveys or whatever else, you don't need to, it's about knowing the right questions to ask. Well, and knowing the right ways to answer those questions.
And I love what you said about using some of the things you're seeing on social media and making that, focusing on that sometimes to be able to make strategic decisions for your institution and making sure that you are going in the right direction. So I work at the University of Virginia, and the horrible things that happened a couple of weeks ago, I mean, we are always focused on diversity and inclusion and making sure that everyone feels welcome. But what happened a couple of weeks ago, as horrible as it was, it really made us reevaluate, are we being as inclusive as possible? And it kind of made us check ourselves. And I think that was, as horrible as that situation was, hopefully that's something that can be positive that comes out of it, that we're now focused on making sure that we are as an inclusive space as possible. We're making sure that is our first priority and that we are being diverse. And without that communication online, we wouldn't know where to focus. And so I like that you talked about that, how it can, because I'm sure that that'll impact recruitment, that'll impact, perception of whether or not someone will want to go to the program, because it's incredible. It's number 2 in the country academically, but what are some other pieces that impact their decision as to whether or not they come to the university? And so I think I love what you're talking about in regards to, kind of do some social listening and do a whole bunch of really strategic analytics in order to make strategic decisions. I use the word strategic 7 times, but you make decisions to really make sure that you're benefiting the student and providing a really quality experience. And because if you're providing a really good product and a really good experience, admissions is gonna come in. It's like, and I think that's a really good way, even beyond admissions, to make sure that we're checking ourselves and moving forward. So that was really valuable, James. I love that. Thank you.
Sure. And again, and you just hit on it. It's about giving yourself an arsenal of tools and methods, again, whether that's, traditional market research, social media listening, predictive analytics, whatever it is, in the end, it's all about listening. And gaining an understanding for how you can best attract and serve the people who, are the best fit for your institution. Right? I mean, it's a two-way street, right? I mean, I think a lot of times people, marketing can be kind of a dirty word for a lot of people, but what's so great about higher ed marketing is, the what's being sold, for lack of a better word, is, a mutually beneficial improvement of people's lives, right? It's not like we're selling, tobacco and firearms here, right? So what we're ultimately looking to do is create a best fit on both sides, right? And what's been so great for me being in this business for a while is working with so many different types of schools. I grew up in New England, right? And I went to a boarding school and that kind of stuff. So my view growing up of like what a good school was very narrow. And until I kind of went to some different schools and, lived in different areas of the country and started working with schools, I had a little, my view was just not broad enough. And so now, for example, there are plenty of schools out there that might not, be at the top of the U.S. News and World Report rankings for X, Y, and Z, or they might not be known about for this or that. But, for the right students and the right connections that they might make with a faculty mentor or whatever, like, there are life-changing experiences afoot for students and administrators across the board, right? And so you never know where those connections are going to be made, and it's not always at sort of the schools and places where people think, right? I mean, for example, if you look at like the Forbes 400 wealthiest people or whatever, a lot of those people aren't going to the elite institutions. I mean, some of them don't even go to college at all, but I think what's most important, right, is like we're in the business of trying to get people connected in the right ways, right? And so I've never had an experience where I've worked with a school where I haven't seen, even if it was a school that I didn't know much about, right, or that again doesn't get all the accolades, there are always beautiful success stories of the right connections being made, and that can really only happen if the schools are able to convey their messages in the right way, but also hear what they need to hear from the students who ultimately are the ones who should be there, right? Well, so it's really just go ahead.
I love that you say that, because my very best friend went to a tiny college in Michigan. It was Albion College, and I think they had like 1,500 students in the whole school. And I went to a much bigger school for my undergrad, and she loved her experience. It was such a perfect fit for her. And I think if she would have gone to a bigger institution, she wouldn't have felt the connection that she had. She wouldn't have felt the community that she felt. Whereas if I was at that institution, I would have gone crazy. I need something bigger. And so you're exactly right. Making sure that you're making that connection that fits right for you, because you're going to be more successful. The university is going to be more successful in turn. And it's a two-way street. I love that.
Yeah. It's I sort of stumbled, I stumbled into higher education marketing completely by accident. I didn't even know that it existed. When I got into the field, I was just graduating from my graduate work, and I had a lot of experience in the private sector in between schooling, and I was really torn about whether to kind of go the institutional route or go back into the private sector. And my assumption was that colleges just had their own marketing departments and they handled everything. I didn't even know that higher education marketing, firms existed. And through one of my professors, actually, her husband worked at a higher education marketing firm, and they were looking, and my professor was like, "Hey, have you ever heard of this company?" And I was like, I was just about to graduate, and I was really torn about what direction to go in, and it's kind of this like beautiful merging of worlds that kind of combined like private sector kind of ways of doing things, but also working in higher education. So it's really just turned out to be a really kind of a blessing for me that I kind of discovered this field. It fulfills a lot of what would otherwise be competing interests. So
I love that. Well, I want to thank you so much, James, for speaking with us today and giving us your insight and your guidance. I've definitely gained a lot of very valuable information. So thank you. This was great.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. Yeah, and I'm not sure how future communications work, but I'm more if anybody has any questions or wants to talk about anything, I'm around. So I really appreciate being invited here. It's been an honor and a privilege, and have a great day to everybody out there.
So. Awesome, and thank you always to our program sponsor, M. Stoner, and to everyone else. Have a great day.
All right, take care, everybody.